In the bustling city of Plano, Texas, where the suburban atmosphere blends with urban convenience, a haunting case unfolded that gripped the community with fear and sorrow for years. The story begins with the ordinary setting of a shopping center parking garage, a place where people come and go daily without giving much thought to the potential dangers hidden within the routine. On one fateful day, a woman was last seen in this garage, and her sudden disappearance sparked confusion, panic, and an eventual years-long investigation. What started as an everyday outing turned into the beginning of one of the city's most discussed unsolved mysteries. Her family, friends, and law enforcement found themselves trapped in a cycle of questions without answers, and the community became bound together by shared anxiety over the disappearance of one of their own. The chilling part of the case was not just the sudden vanishing, but also the fact that it took years before her remains were finally discovered, a discovery that opened doors to more questions than it answered. At first, her disappearance seemed almost surreal. People vanish in ways that usually involve some explanation, such as running away, abduction, or personal struggles. However, this woman had no immediate signs of distress or intentions to vanish. She was seen alive in the parking garage, an environment under cameras and public eyes, and yet she disappeared without leaving a visible trace. Investigators were called in immediately when she failed to return home, and search efforts began almost instantly. The parking garage was swept, nearby businesses were questioned, and security footage was reviewed. What investigators found was baffling. There was no clear footage showing her exiting, no obvious signs of a struggle, and no evidence pointing to her voluntarily leaving everything behind. Her vehicle was eventually located, a clue that both narrowed and widened the investigation. The vehicle's presence suggested she had not driven away, yet the lack of her presence left authorities with countless possible scenarios. Her family was devastated and worked alongside the police to keep her story in the public eye. Flyers were distributed, vigils were held, and her case received attention in local media. Each passing day felt heavier as the chances of finding her safe diminished. Yet the police had very little physical evidence to work with. Theories began to circulate. Some believed she was abducted by a stranger in the parking garage, an unsettling possibility that highlighted the dangers lurking in seemingly safe public spaces. Others speculated that she might have known her abductor, suggesting someone close to her had orchestrated her disappearance. Investigators had to carefully balance every possible angle. The parking garage was an important detail because such locations are vulnerable zones where perpetrators can easily corner their victims with limited visibility and potential blind spots in surveillance systems. As months turned into years, her case remained cold. Detectives rotated, technology advanced, and the family continued to push for answers. The lack of resolution weighed heavily on the community, which saw the disappearance as both a tragedy and a reflection of how fragile everyday safety can be. Over time, hope shifted from finding her alive to at least finding closure. It became about recovering her remains, understanding what happened, and bringing whoever was responsible to justice. Families in these situations often experience a painful limbo, where grief cannot fully set in because the fate of their loved one remains uncertain. Her case became a textbook example of how unresolved disappearances torment those left behind, creating a never-ending cycle of pain and unanswered questions. When her remains were eventually discovered years later, it marked a significant turning point in the case. The recovery site of the remains became the centerpiece of renewed investigation. Law enforcement meticulously examined the scene, searching for any trace evidence that could reveal how she had died or who was involved. The discovery reignited media attention, and the community once again revisited the haunting details of her initial disappearance. Yet, even with the remains recovered, closure was far from complete. The condition of the remains limited what forensic experts could determine, leaving only fragments of the truth. This reality frustrated investigators, who had been hoping for a breakthrough that could definitively identify a cause of death or implicate a suspect. Instead, the case transformed into one of those unsolved mysteries where discovery provides partial resolution while still leaving the larger puzzle unsolved. Analyzing the case requires looking at several layers. First, there is the element of environment. Parking garages are notoriously dangerous for solitary individuals, especially women, Due to their isolated design, poor lighting, and multiple exit points, the very architecture of the location may have contributed to her vulnerability. This element underlines a larger issue of urban planning and public safety, where spaces designed for utility often compromise security. Second, there is the psychological impact on both the family and the wider community. A case like this generates deep-seated fear, particularly among women, who often rethink their routines after hearing such stories. It becomes not just one woman's tragedy, but also a collective trauma that influences the daily behaviors of countless others who identify with her vulnerability. Third, the investigation highlights the challenges law enforcement faces when evidence is minimal. Without witnesses, clear video footage, or immediate leads, the trail grows cold quickly. Even small mistakes early in the investigation, such as missed evidence or overlooked testimonies, can result in years of stagnation. Another layer to analyze is the broader cultural fascination with unsolved disappearances. Society tends to latch on to such cases because they highlight the fragility of human existence and the unpredictability of danger. The case of this woman in Plano became a symbol of all the unresolved stories that haunt communities across the country. Her face on missing posters, her name spoken at vigils, and her story shared in news outlets all contributed to the collective memory of a community seeking justice. Yet the years-long silence before her remains were found meant that her story drifted in and out of the public consciousness. It serves as a reminder of how time can erode attention, while families continue to live with the daily reality of loss. The forensic aspect of the case is also significant. When remains are found years after a disappearance, the passage of time poses severe challenges. Soft tissues decompose, evidence is lost to the environment, and potential DNA from suspects is degraded. The longer it takes to find a body, the harder it becomes to establish key details such as the cause of death, whether there were signs of struggle, or if a weapon was used. In her case, these limitations meant that investigators were working with incomplete evidence, leaving them to piece together theories rather than solid facts. The frustration lies in the fact that a crime that likely took only minutes to commit resulted in years of investigative challenges, with justice still out of reach. From a criminological perspective, one can examine the possible scenarios that fit this disappearance. Stranger abductions are statistically rare but not impossible, especially in vulnerable environments like parking garages. If this was the case, the perpetrator likely had opportunistic motives, striking quickly and leaving little evidence. Alternatively, the involvement of someone she knew would suggest a premeditated plan, where the perpetrator exploited trust to lure her into danger. In both cases, the lack of witnesses or direct evidence makes reconstruction difficult. The discovery of her remains did not necessarily confirm either scenario, leaving law enforcement with a list of possible suspects, but no definitive answers. Her case also shines a light on the resilience of families who endure years without answers. For them, every holiday, birthday, or anniversary is a painful reminder of the missing presence. They often become advocates not only for their loved one but also for broader issues of safety, justice, and awareness. Families in such situations frequently work with nonprofit organizations, raise funds for search efforts, and keep the case alive in the public sphere. Their efforts are often the reason cold cases receive renewed attention years later. In this case, her family's persistence ensured that her story was not forgotten, and that her remains were eventually found, even if justice remains elusive. The societal implications of this case are far-reaching. It is a stark reminder that danger can lurk in everyday spaces, that unresolved disappearances leave lasting scars, and that the quest for justice can span years without guarantee of success. It also highlights the importance of public vigilance and community involvement in missing persons cases. Every sighting reported, every flyer distributed, and every conversation sparked by her story contributed to keeping the case alive. Without such community involvement, many disappearances risk fading into obscurity. Her case demonstrates how communal solidarity can sustain momentum in the face of investigative stagnation. The case also serves as a sobering lesson for law enforcement in terms of procedural improvements. Enhanced surveillance systems, better coordination between agencies, and advances in forensic technology are all responses that have grown out of similar cases. Today, Parking garages are more likely to have higher quality cameras, panic buttons, and improved lighting because of tragedies like hers. While these changes cannot undo the past, they represent progress in preventing future crimes of similar nature. Thus, her disappearance, while tragic, has indirectly contributed to greater awareness and improved safety measures in public spaces. When we reflect on her story, it becomes more than just an isolated crime. It becomes part of a larger narrative of vulnerability, resilience, and the quest for justice. Her last known moments in a parking garage became etched into the memory of a community, and the eventual discovery of her remains years later offered only partial closure. The unanswered questions still linger. Who was responsible? Why did this happen? And how could it have been prevented? These questions ensure that her case continues to live on in the collective consciousness, a reminder of both the fragility of life and the enduring strength of those who refuse to stop searching for the truth. The haunting reality is that the true story of what happened in that parking garage may never be fully known. The perpetrator, if still alive, may walk free, carrying the burden of a dark secret while the victim's loved ones carry the burden of grief. Yet the discovery of her remains at least brought an end to the uncertainty of her fate. She was no longer just a missing person, but someone whose life and memory could be honored properly. The case underscores the painful balance between closure and justice, reminding us that closure does not always mean answers, and answers do not always lead to justice. Ultimately, the Plano disappearance that began in a shopping center parking garage and ended years later with the discovery of remains is a story that encapsulates the complexities of unsolved crimes. It illustrates the interplay of environment, investigation, psychology, and community. It reflects the anguish of families and the limitations of law enforcement. It stands as a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers in everyday life and the enduring fight for justice in the face of silence and uncertainty. At its core, it is a story of a woman whose ordinary day turned into a tragedy, of a family whose life was forever altered, and of a community that will never forget the haunting memory of her disappearance and the unresolved questions that still remain.